Well, let me just share with you that we have a special guest. You know, with all that's been taking place, uh, we were making a decision. There were some that had made great suggestions and the idea of praying for Israel. And we said, well, when are we going to have that take place? And we decided on Shabbat would be a good day for it to happen and invite people from the community as best as possible. The important thing is that we ourselves are praying, and I know that you are. And then the Lord reminded me of a person whom I have come to know as a friend, although we have crossed paths in our professional careers a number of times. And I thought I was saying, well, you know, I know it's short notice. And he said to me, you know, Joe, this is short notice. But I said, if there's anyone who I knew who could do this on short notice, you're the person who would be able to do it. And we sort of go back many, many years because I at one time worked for the Voice of Hope, which was a broadcast group. And I don't know, you did work with George, right? Correct? Yeah. George Otis, who had the Voice of Hope, and it was a broadcast that was heard all around the world, really, basically, and especially in the Middle East. And I had the opportunity to have a broadcast on the station at that time. I was actually asked back in those days to go to Israel, and we did not go, but I know around the same time, I believe it was approximately anyway, our special guest went, and he spent 30 years, I believe at least 30 or maybe a little bit more, 30 years in Israel, living in Israel as a reporter, reported for many well-known broadcast stations. He's also the author of several books, and he has a great knowledge of Israel, and he actually said, I may be there a little late because of what's happening in Israel, and he's doing broadcasts and reports even as we speak, even though he says he's retired. I don't believe it yet anyway. So I appreciate the fact that he has come, and he has just a few books that he's brought with him too, and he's an author of books and talking and a novel, as I understand, as well. And so I truly am appreciative of him coming and showing us some of the things that he's been talking to radio stations about since this happened a couple of weeks ago now. And it's truly a wonderful thing to see that churches have come together to pray for Israel, that people have come to pray, and we have prayed, and I know that you are praying. But I'd like to welcome, and I appreciate the fact that David Dolan is coming to spend some time with us, and he'll share with us from his heart. I'm sure that will be a time for Q&A. If you have a question that you'd like to ask him, he'd be more than happy to answer that what he can. And so I appreciate him being here. David, would you come, please, and bless us with that which the Lord has given to you? So let's.
Oh, good. Water. This maybe needs to.
We're using their sound system not quite the way they're used to.
It's a bit of an echo, yeah. I know. This is beautiful, Pastor, by the way, this fall display. I dressed appropriately. Colors. Yeah, that's good. I think so. Actually, Joe, I tell people I was in Israel 33 years. I lived there 33 years, which is the same amount of time that Jesus lived there. But he left in a little bit different way than I did. Crucified, but then, of course, he took El Al to heaven on the Mount of Olives and is coming back to that very spot, the Bible says. So that's good. I'm thank you for inviting me. It was just a couple days ago or 3 or 4 days ago, but I was able to do it. And yes, I do a Saturday national radio program, a Mideast news update. So that they asked me we taped it yesterday, but they asked me to be available this morning at 10, which is when it goes on, in case something major had happened between the time we taped it. And I mean, there's a war going on, so there's always major stuff happening. But I was able to leave soon after that, and then got into the construction they're doing over towards Idaho. Anyway, it is a blessing to be here, but I wish it were, better circumstances, obviously. And the huge Israeli flag here is good to see, but the country is torn, and I'm glad there's no little kids here, because I just want to paint a little bit more of a picture that I'm getting from. I know he'll be okay. I'm just going to paint a little bit more picture than you're hearing in the media, because some things are being withheld and some things are being toned down, which they have to do. That's not, it's everybody watches TV and radio and whatever, so you have to do it. But I have reports. I have hundreds of friends in Israel, 33 years. I lived there most of my adult life. I went there in 1980, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, and did work with the Voice of Hope up in Lebanon. And so everything that's happening right now up there, I'm very familiar with all the different places where the attacks are taking place. Margaliot yesterday, I've been there many times, and the kibbutz I lived on for a year has been hit a few times, and Army base next door, et cetera. So I'm praying for all my friends. I have many who've been called into Miloim, into, reserves. As you've heard, I'm sure over 300,000 men and women, quite a few women too, are serving, and they're obviously facing harm's way. There's already been 2 Jewish believers killed in the initial massacre next to the Gaza Strip that I know of. And I'm hearing some reports from people I know. And on top of the genocidal massacre that these 200 plus highly trained Hamas terrorists carried out, were acts that are not, as I said, even speakable. And this morning, Trey Yanks, if you recognize that name, he's the Fox News correspondent based in Jerusalem. I've met him. He and a bunch of other journalists just earlier today, were shown by the IDF some more of the camera footage that they were able to get from some of the dead Palestinians, because they were taping everything. They all had body cams on. They've had other things. And they thought, with this, with Hezbollah escalating in the north, with Iran basically threatening war, declaring war even, I'll talk about that in a minute, we've got to make sure that this social media campaign claiming there was no massacre and this has all been made up, that people know what happened. And so he wouldn't show some of the video that they have, but he described it as best he could, and he warned everybody that this is, but again, he left out stuff that happened. A lot of the men had their genitals cut off. Women had their breasts cut off. They were given orders to stomp on the heads of the dead, crush them. And it's in their instructions, and they had pictures of that and some other things. But I mean, it was it's being described as the worst slaughter of civilians, at any one time since World War II, and that's factually true. But nothing in World War II, even as brutal as the Nazis were at times and their allies, nothing happened like that. I mean, we had the Babi Yar massacre in Kiev. All of the Jews of Kiev, of course, the Ukrainian capital and the surrounding area, and there were hundreds of thousands of them, were rounded up, and many thousands were shot dead and dumped in a huge pit. And there's a memorial there. I've not been to it, but friends of mine have and described it to me. Putin actually hit it with a rocket last year in the war going on there. But that took place over several days, and that was tens of thousands. So that was a major. But even then, they didn't, behead people. They didn't Another thing I didn't mention, they were ordered to cut off people's feet while they were still alive. So a lot of those people went through that. So just terrible. And obviously, it was very well pre-planned, very well executed, actually, showing Hamas has come a long ways, as a terror group. They are really a state government, frankly. They have, there's 2 million people they govern, and Gaza and whatever, but they obviously designed it to create rage, absolute rage. And every day, the Israeli public is learning more of these things as well. And the stories are getting around, more pictures are coming out, et cetera. So, and of course, Joe Biden was shown some of this, and he urged Bibi Netanyahu not to react in rage. You can have rage, but don't react in that, and, think carefully what you do and whatever. He is, but, it was clearly Israel's 9/11. I mean, nothing like this has... Excuse me. Sorry. Nasty. You're not supposed to do that in public, but it happens. The older you get, the more, at least I won't say that. Continent. So, it was clearly pre-planned to just, send everybody crazy. And they're being careful not to react in a crazy manner. And, I've been around the IDF many, many times. I have many friends that are soldiers and whatever, and they're well trained, and the leaders are well trained, but they're even and they're balanced. And yes, they have a lot of anger, of course. This is horrible. And again, that it wasn't, if they had gone and done this in a couple of the military bases near Gaza, that would have been horrendous. But at least they would be killing soldiers, that give a couple of years or 3 years of their life to defend the country and whatever. We all know the story. It was everybody. They're now thinking several hundred kids amidst the dead and many old people, and et cetera. And the kibbutz, if you've been on a kibbutz, I lived on several. They're wonderful places. Everybody knows everybody, and they're open and friendly. Even today, although the ones right next to the border with Lebanon and Gaza, usually they have more security, but people leave their doors open and they go from house to house, and it's very relaxed and that sort of thing. So this is what they did, and Israel is responding. I'm most concerned about the war spreading to the north, and it has. The Israeli Defense Minister Gallant said this morning, actually, he visited the north, the soldiers up there, and he said, folks, this is a war. Hezbollah has declared war on us already. We're talking about will they, won't they? That's just, will they unleash their massive rocket barrage against Israel? Yes, but at their timing. And but in the meantime, we've had over the last 2 weeks, 30 Hezbollah, I think they said this morning, fighters were killed, 8 Israeli soldiers, several Israeli civilians, all in that northern area. And there's been hundreds of rockets fired. They're firing anti-tank missiles mainly at IDF bases along the border. And one of them was right next to the kibbutz that I was on. I went there, as I said, in 1980, and I shared a little of this when I gave my testimony, Joe, a couple years ago on Zoom, but I'll just mention a couple things again. I went there with a group called Project Kibbutz, which was placing teams of young Christians from all over the world on kibbutz settlements for a year. We committed to being there as a group for a whole year. If you know anything about the kibbutz system, normally young people, sometimes older people come, and they usually spend 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, but they don't stay for a full year, and they're partying, and they're just there to have a good time. We made a commitment for a year, and because of that, the kibbutz said they'd give us permanent jobs. more or less. I mean, through the year, you do more or less the same thing. And these were good jobs because we were going to be there, for that time. And we were warned that the northern kibbutz that we were heading towards was often shelled. And we had a choice between that kibbutz or one that was, guess where? Just north of Sderot, which is just next to the Gaza Strip. So the southern one is about 3 miles north of the Erez crossing in the north of the Gaza Strip. Fortunately, the terrorists didn't get that far, thank God. A lot of my friends, they lived there a year. Our team was split into two, 30 people. Half went there and half went to the north. And we were warned the north is occasionally shelled from across the border in Lebanon. Well, it wasn't Hezbollah. They didn't exist. It was the PLO, Arafat. He'd been kicked out of Jordan in 1970 by King Hussein. He tried to launch a coup against him. Arafat did. He went to South Lebanon and set up a mini state there and got all the Sunni Muslims in particular to, join his fight basically from South Lebanon. The Shiites had their own militia at that time, but not Hezbollah, and they kind of stayed on the side more or less. And the Christians of Lebanon, many of them moved to the southern border area because a Christian colonel, and Joe knows who he is. You probably met him. I met him many times. Colonel Haddad, a major general, actually, he was Major General Haddad in the Lebanese army. So he was even higher ranking now that I think of it. And he set up this mini state in South Lebanon in 1978 to protect the Christians of Lebanon who were being slaughtered in Beirut and other parts of the country. And Christians, mostly Maronite Catholics, if you know that wing of the Catholic Church, but some Protestants and Baptists and other things there too. And they moved down there, and that was the mini state. And that's where the radio station was set up, the Voice of Hope, by George Otis in California. Simi Valley, I think, was the headquarters. And I was already there for a year on this kibbutz, living in a bomb shelter. The first half of the year, we slept every night in a bomb shelter. The rocket fire was that frequent. And like I said, there was an army base right next door, so they were often firing actually at it, but we were getting hit by every 5 or 6 rocket would hit our kibbutz. So we were down there a lot, and I've mentioned in my testimony, but I'll just say it again. It was at that time that one of my teammates, but not on my kibbutz, but we had groups on 8 different kibbutz settlements. One that was hit yesterday, Kibbutz Dan, we had a team there. It was hit by mortar fire yesterday, and they closed the highway there in the north. Joe, they closed it all down entirely. But one of my teammates wrote the song, "You Are My Hiding Place." I'm sure you've all heard that. You are my hiding place, that one, during that time. And I and a gal from England were co-leading we're worship leaders of our team. I'd done some of that here in the States before I went to Israel, and I ended up doing a lot of that over the years I was there. I was in choirs, I was in plays, I was in an opera, David and Bathsheba, and all sorts of fun things. But he said, "I've written this song that I think is really good." He and I were meeting, and with some other worship leaders from the other team. He said, "I want to teach it to you guys." So he did. And I said, "Oh, that's beautiful. And it's so much what we need right now. I'll trust in you. Let the weak say I'm strong. You're my hiding place. You're my shelter." And I mentioned it to our Hebrew teacher, an Israeli, obviously. And he said, "Oh, that scripture. Yeah, that's in Psalm 46. I said, "Yeah, and he said, "Do you know what the Hebrew word is for shelter?" And I knew it. It was miklat. He said, "Well, that's the basis. It comes from that verse. That's where modern Israel, because, they didn't have bomb shelters in biblical days. So and they didn't have televisions or irons or videos, whatever. So they've had to make up modern Hebrew sounding words. And video is something, but nobody knows it. Everyone says video. television is something, but everyone says televisia, so they still use the English for a lot of it, or the English basis. But he said, that's where that came from. You're my hiding place. You are my shelter. The God of Jacob is my stronghold. He said, that's where so I understood that's what the Lord was saying to us, and we all learned it. And he asked me to teach it we had all of our teams together at the Dead Sea. And he was a shy guy. He's a Messianic pastor down in Phoenix. I think he still is. He's probably retired now. He's about my age. But he asked me to teach it, and I started by saying to everybody, there's 150 of us, I said, here we are at the lowest point on earth, the Dead Sea, as close to hell as you can get, if you will. And we're singing about God being our protection and our hiding place. And we in the north are living under rocket fire, and people in the south weren't then, but of course now they are. But this war is intense and growing, and I frankly believe that it is probably the big one that we've all been talking about in Israel for several decades. Really, it goes back that far. Of course, the last war that Israel was involved with another state, full state, was the war I was involved with in South Lebanon in 1982, when Israeli and Syrian aircraft battled over Lebanon and over parts of the Golan and Syria. There were ground skirmishes. There were 40,000+ Syrian troops in Lebanon at that time. So that was the last time. Sorry. Oh, I thought that was the last time we had a major two-state war. And we've all known that someday there's going to be another multi-front war. And obviously Iran, 82 was just 3 years after Ayatollah Khomeini took over Iran. And what did he immediately declare? We're going to wipe Israel out. That's going to be our goal. We're going to work till the jihad is completed and Israel is no more. And, he was taking over a country of 50 million people even then. It's even today, it's larger than Egypt, which is the largest Arab country. So it's a major country. And, they're Aryan, if you will. They are. That's where the word Aryan comes from, Iran, etc. And what am I saying by that? I want to be careful how I say this, but they're probably a little better than the Arabs at building weapons and doing some of these things. They really, this is much more up their alley. And of course, they're closely backed by Russia, and they're now allied with China and North Korea, which has a full nuclear program, meaning they may have passed something on to Iran years ago even. And we just don't know that Iran doesn't at this moment possess a workable nuclear weapon. In fact, many Israeli intelligence people think it's likely that they do. And what they fear the most are they're called field nuclear weapons, theater nuclear weapons. And those are the ones that Putin's been threatening to fire in Ukraine. And they don't travel that far, 50, 60 miles, I think, maximum. And they don't have a massive explosive power, but they are designed to wipe out battalions of soldiers and military bases. So they're not a toy. They're powerful enough. And some from Ukraine went missing after the fall of the Soviet Union, and there's others that could be on the black market. And then, like I said, North Korea has a program as a close ally of Iran, and they could have supplied them with everything. So this ongoing question of, how close are they to nuclear and should their program be stopped and stuff, it's probably irrelevant. They probably already have that. And the suspicion that they do is enhanced by what's happening now. And they started out as a terrorist organization or supporting terrorism and terrorist organizations from the very get-go. It was 3 years later, 82, I was there in South Lebanon when Hezbollah was created by them. And they say on the news, Iran supports Hezbollah or Iran backs Hezbollah. No, Iran is Hezbollah's daddy. They created it from scratch. Now, they didn't do that with Hamas. Hamas formed in 1987. And it quickly became a very popular, and I'm going to read you a couple things from my book, from their charter in a second here. They quickly became popular on the street. But what did Hezbollah do? 40 years ago this Monday, in 2 days, it will be 40 years exactly since they attacked and blew up with truck bombs the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241. Now that is America's largest single military death toll at any one time, period, apart from one other. And I'm sure you know what that is, Pearl Harbor. So that was basically a second Pearl Harbor. It was a declaration of war by Iran right in the early years of the Khomeini regime. And they're still there, his successor Khamenei, but they're still there all these years later, that they were going to war against America. And of course they had, and Joe and I at least are old enough to remember this, they had taken our embassy in 79 and held, right after Khomeini took power, held dozens of Americans hostage until Ronald Reagan came to power. So it was a terrible time, but they made clear who they are from the very get-go is what I'm saying. And I was working at the Voice of Hope at the time. I had the morning show most of the time, sometimes night, but the next morning I was going to be on the air, and I wasn't there when the explosion took place. I was on an airplane from London. I'd taken a short vacation and seen some of my Project Kibbutz friends that were from there. And as soon as we got off the plane, people started coming up and telling us what had happened. There was 49 French Marines killed too. So it was not just, it was a multinational peacekeeping force that they blew up. So I knew when I heard that the next morning I'd be talking to the friends, the buddies of these guys that were just killed, because we knew that the Voice of Hope was listened to by them. It was the only American radio station in the whole area, the only English apart from the BBC, but they don't have music or anything that they could get. News in English. It was half Arabic, half the day Arabic and half English, but they all listened to the English. And we played country western music, which some of us thought was a little crazy, but George Otis thought that was what we should play, is country western. So we had 3 country western songs and a Christian song, 3 more country western and a Christian. So these guys, a lot of them were Christians too, so they didn't mind the Christian music, and who minds Amy Grant, you know, and whatever. So very popular. So I knew the next day I'd be talking to them, and it was tough going in there. And I started to weep, you know, as I was trying to give them some comfort. But I said, you know, this is the time to just let it go. And George had said this, the founder of the Voice of Hope, that if something huge like that happened and you feel you have to minister, do it. He said, just do it. Just don't stop playing the music and just do it. You know, so we had that permission. And I did, but, you know, and Hezbollah's gone on ever since then. We've had another war with them in 2006, and there was hope they would stay out of this, but clearly they're not. And there's all this talk going on. Did Iran know? Was Iran behind it? Well, Iran, like I said, didn't create Hamas, but they now fully back it and have for about 15 years, and they are its main source of funding and of weapons, and they fly hundreds of these guys over to Iran for training, you know, for these operations and hang gliders and all this sort of thing. So it's a terrible organization. But the book that Joe mentioned, Holy War for the Promised Land, I originally wrote this in 1989 and 90, so just a year after Hamas was founded. But by the time I was finishing it, this was during the first Palestinian uprising, and they were formed at the beginning of that. By the time I was finishing it, they had taken over the first uprising. It was started by them basically in Gaza, but the PLO immediately came in and took control of it, Arafat, and they formed a committee of these different the different groups that are in the PLO. They each had a representative. They met every day and they decided where they were going to strike and where they were going to riot and what the program was for that day. And they invited Hamas to join them. And the Hamas leaders at the time said, no, sorry, we've got a little bit different agenda than you. We want to see Israel totally wiped out. We don't want to just have any limited wars or uprising. We're not demanding the West Bank or what. We want Israel gone, period. So they did their own thing. And within a year, they were the most popular group. Within about a year and a half, they were putting up their own posters every day, instructing the people where to riot, they took it over, basically. So, of course, Arafat recognized this and accepted an invitation. Iran was behind it, but an international Islamic conference basically designed to focus on jihad and talk about the need to continue jihad, etc. Arafat accepted an invitation and said at that, I'll go along with this. 2 years later, he signed the Oslo Peace Accord under Bill Clinton. But of course, that only lasted a few years. Yitzhak Rabin was shot dead by a fellow Israeli 3 years later. And Lebanon, again, Hezbollah attacked majorly. I think it was 2007 or 1997 or 8, I forgot now, but right around then. And we've had 4 or 5 of those over the years. And then in 2000, Arafat, realizing that people were very unsatisfied with his rule, the Palestinians I'm talking, a lot of corruption, a lot of problems, a lot of internal. So he unleashed the second uprising. And what was the excuse? Ariel Sharon, then prime minister, then defense minister, walked up to the Temple Mount and visited it. And that set off a war, so and of course he would later, Sharon, be the one to pull Israeli forces out of Gaza. All 8,000 Israelis living then in Gaza in 2005, his government pulled them out, demanded. There was, some of you will remember this, there was a lot of unrest and trouble and whatever, disputes over that, but he did it. He thought Arafat by then had calmed down and they were again having security cooperation with Israel by then. He thought, oh, well, he'll take over and it'll be okay. It won't be bad. No worse than it is in Hebron or Nablus when we're not in an uprising. Well, one man in his party said no, and that was Bibi Netanyahu. He said, you're Meshugana, you're crazy. He said, Hamas was founded there. They are extremely popular there. And he said, this will turn into Hamastan, he called it, within a year or two. He was absolutely right. PA came in when Israel left in August of 2005. And 2 summers later, Hamas rose up in a violent coup and threw them out, slaughtered a bunch of them in an internal battle, and took over, and they've been running it ever since. So, and again, Netanyahu had said they're going to lob rockets at us all the time. They're going to do cross-border. But again, no one ever in all the war plans I've heard of, all the people I've talked to, all the generals, all the leaders I've interviewed, politicians, no one foresaw this 2 weeks ago today. No one. And again, it was a barbarism. You'd have to go back to Attila the Hun, sort of thing, where they're rushing in with swords and they have gas to spray on the people and lighters to, and it's all in their manual. This isn't the guys got there and went wild. No, this was exactly what they were instructed to do. And obviously, so that's why I say, obviously, Hamas knew this was going to produce a huge Israeli reaction. Hezbollah would have been informed, and Iran certainly knew. And as the 3 big papers in this country reported, the Iranian leaders met with Hezbollah leaders and Hamas leaders in Beirut just 2 weeks before the attack and finalized the whole thing. There's no way Hamas would have done that without there. So there we are, and it goes on. I just want to, quickly, I'll just mention, just to give you an idea of what this group is. This is their official charter published in August of '88. I was working for CBS at the time. I worked for CBS for 12 years over there, and I reported on it at the time. And I paid, before I read this, I'll just say, I paid a lot of attention to them from the start, not just later when they became obviously quite popular and quite, and the opinion surveys today, as they have for years, show they are the most popular group amongst the Palestinians by about 70%, as opposed to 20% for, the PLO or the PA and some others. So they are overwhelmingly popular. And I understood that. And my colleagues, my journalist colleagues, Tom Friedman from the New York Times, who's Jewish, Bob Simon, who I worked with from CBS. I was with the radio, he the TV, but I knew him and worked with him. Jewish also, but they didn't think Hamas was anything. They even criticized the book when the first edition, Thomas Nelson in '91 came out, and they criticized it because they said you're wasting too much space, about 12 pages, on this new group, Hamas. They're not going to amount to anything. They're a radical side. It's the PA, it's the PLO and them that we have to worry about, think about, focus on. Well, they're Jewish, but neither of them is practicing Jew. And very few, you may have noticed this, very few journalists seem to be Christians either, or practicing believers. Pretty much left wing, and the thing we think of, and that sort of thing is generally true. And in fact, they took a poll at the CBS office in Tel Aviv on the Israelis. Nobody had voted for any of the right wing or center parties. They all had voted. There's 26 people. They all voted for the left, the communists and the socialists and all that stuff. It's just the way it is. But so they didn't understand the power of religion, because they didn't have faith themselves. And they didn't certainly understand Islam and how deep this goes. And they didn't understand the passion that I would say a majority of Palestinians and Arabs in the other countries have for this faith. It's what they were raised in. 90% of them or something are Muslims. It's overwhelmingly a part of their culture and their tradition and their, everything about it. And Hamas came along and said, hey, these secular leaders and Nasser of Egypt and Saddam and these others, they're not destroying Israel. They're not succeeding. It's because they're not following Allah. They're not following Muhammad. And they need to all repent. And that was Khomeini's line. He started saying that immediately in '79. And then 10 years later, Hamas is formed, and they start saying the same thing. We'll only win over Israel if we declare full jihad. There can be nothing else but that. And because I'm an American and not Jewish, my great-grandfather was Jewish, but, the Palestinians didn't know that. And I didn't tell them. They would tell me things that they wouldn't tell Bob Simon or Tom Friedman because they are Jewish. So they told me more of what they really believe, what they're really wanting to see more honestly than they would with these guys. So I started to understand more and more as I was writing the book that this really is a holy war. And because it's there, Hamas and the other group, Islamic Jihad, formed by Iran in 1979, that because they're basing everything they're doing on their deep faith, which they actually have. I mean, a lot of people, Westerners and that, they can't really believe that. They can't really want to see beheadings. No, but Muhammad beheaded. That's the example they have. That's part of their scriptures. Now, of course, many of them are Jack Muslims, if you will. They're not practicing. They drink. They do things that are not according to Islamic rules. But the mosque they don't go to is an Islamic mosque, if you will. And this is part of their DNA down in their background. So this is their covenant. I'm not going to read by any means. It's got 36 articles, but just a couple things. It begins with several verses from the Quran that condemn the Jews because they do not believe in Allah. And it quotes a former Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood leader that says Israel will exist until Allah eliminates it, and Islam will do that. I'm just paraphrasing here for time. Article 6 says Hamas is, quote, working to unfurl the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine, not just the West Bank and whatever. Article 7, Hamas is a link in the chain of jihad against the Zionist invasion. It looks to the forward fulfillment of Allah's promise in the not too distant future. And then it ends, and this is very important, it ends with a well-known saying from writing from the Hadith, which is the Muslim oral tradition, but it's written down like in Judaism too, in a different way. It's attributed to Muhammad, and here's the quote: "The day will come when Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them to the degree." Now listen to this, what happened 2 weeks ago. To the degree that the Jew will hide behind the rocks and trees, which will call out to the Muslims and tell him, "Servant of Allah, a Jew is hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Okay, Article 8. Allah is the ultimate objective of Hamas, his messenger Muhammad, its touchstone, the Quran, its constitution, jihad, its path, and death for the sake of Allah, its chief interest. Article 11, the Islamic resistance movement considers that Palestine is Islamic religious trust land, Waqf in Arabic, assigned to the Muslims until the end of time. It may not be renounced or conceded, whether in whole or in part. This is stipulated in the Islamic Sharia law, which it is. Any land conquered by Islam must remain Islamic forever. So Palestine is to be treated like all lands forcibly conquered by the Muslims. Article 13, I won't read it. It condemns peace talks, peace solutions, attempts to make peace. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. The Jews and Christians won't be satisfied. This is a quote, until you join their communities, on and on. You know, so it goes on to make clear what they're doing. And then it gets into the middle of it, some real deep anti-Semitism that echoes Hitler. I'll just read you a couple things. It calls for the Islamic spirit to prevail throughout Muslim society, to contradict the scheming enemy with his Nazi conduct. Oh, okay, it's the Israelis that are acting like Nazis here, slaughtering themselves, no doubt. Jewish Nazism, that's in there, does not spare women or children. Well, who doesn't spare women or children? It's not Israel that is slaughtering in this way. The Jews were behind the French Revolution. They have amassed astounding influence and wealth. They control the world media, news agency, that's a laugh, the press, broadcasting stations. They were behind the French and Communist revolutions. Whenever you see wealth, they're behind it. They set up to expand their power, the Freemasons, the Rotary, Lions Club, and B'nai B'rith. The Jews set up the Rotary to control the world, instigated World War I in order to secure the Balfour Declaration, caused World War II as a prelude to setting up their state, set up the United Nations, and on and on and on. So, and then it expresses support for all sister organizations, and it ends with that. So that gives you an idea, and they are not even remotely discussing, like the PLO did, renouncing some of their charter or altering it. You know, Arafat said, "Oh yeah, we'll change a few things in ours," because theirs called for Israel's destruction too, and then they altered it to just say, "We hope you go away." You know, but so that's what Israel's fighting right now, and Hezbollah, of course, believes all these same things, absolutely. And again, when my book first came out, it was reviewed in various places. There was a British edition, Hodder and Stoughton in Britain, And an Islamic scholar at Cambridge was asked by the London Times to write a review. And he did. And my publisher told me that they didn't know what it would be, but they knew he'd been asked. And they were a little nervous, and I was too, once you get it. But the summary of it was that I disagree with some of his conclusions, but what he says about Islam, what he says about Hamas, what he says about this is accurate from our teachings, from our Quran, from our Hadith. It is accurate. And as King Hussein, the late King Hussein of Jordan, his brother, the Crown Prince, said in a speech in English, he'd never say this in Arabic, but he said, we'd love to be able to make full and lasting peace, but most of our people are Muslims. Basically, is all he said. But, the interviewer knew what he was saying, that they're never going to accept this. And of course, hundreds of thousands are marching in Amman and Cairo and all these places right now. So where's it going to end? I've got to end too. It's I just saw the clock. Oh my, it's lunchtime. I believe that it is the big one that we've been talking about since 1982. Of course, we had Saddam Scuds in 91, which is a war, but we didn't have soldiers on the ground, and we didn't have, we had the Arabs doing things on the ground, but, not anything like this. And we thought in 2006, when Hezbollah attacked in a major way, then that went on for 7 weeks, that maybe that would bring others in and we'd have two fronts and whatever. But when that happened, the PLO was still in control of Gaza. It was just a few months. It was just around that time that Hamas, it was a year later, I'm sorry, that Hamas seized control of Gaza. So Gaza stayed quiet and the north was very bad. But this one, it's already in both fronts, in the north and south. And of course, it's really a four-front war. The third is you could even say 5, but the northern front is Syria and Lebanon, both together. But the Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, is definitely a front. There's going to be a lot of trouble there. And of course, the south, the Gaza border, but also the homeland front. And I'm being told by some of my contacts and friends that one of the reasons Israel's delayed the ground operation into Gaza is because they know that Hezbollah is getting involved. They're already involved. They believe Iran will get involved. And what Khomeini called for on Thursday, Khamenei, the new one, on Thursday he made a speech and he basically laid out the war plan. He said it's going to be a multi-pronged offensive, come from different directions. He said we have jihad volunteer fighters roaring to get into the battle from Iraq, from Iran itself, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and in some of the Gulf countries. And he mentioned worldwide Islam. And you may know that there were fighters from Pakistan and Afghanistan and even Indonesia and farther places that joined the 48 war to a certain extent, the 67 war. There were fighters from all these places. So he was calling for them to all mass in the northern border. And of course, Iran controls the land from its own country through the Shiite sections of Iraq. There's some U.S. forces there, but, we're not going to start bombing convoys of young men heading west, probably. I mean, there's been action there too this week, a lot of stuff going on, and gather there at the northern border. He spelled it out, and he said that our resistance, and of course Hamas is an acronym meaning Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas. That's what it stands for. So he used that same word. Our resistance will not end until Israel is destroyed. So he declared war on Israel. And he said anyone that helps Israel is going to have the same fate. So he declared war on America and European countries too. And didn't get much press coverage. It's amazing. And then afterwards, a commentator came on at state TV, so he wouldn't have been there if he wasn't approved. And he spelled out exactly the plan, more detail, the multi-prong. And he said, we're going to go in on the ground like Hamas did, and then they'll unleash their rocket barrage as cover, like Hamas did. So they're saving the bulk of their power until then. And Israel still hasn't gone in because, again, they've had to send a lot more of those reserve soldiers that were heading to the south to the north. So it's a different war developing than it might have been 2 weeks ago. And they were hoping Hezbollah would stay up. But again, the defense minister said today they're in, and I think that's pretty clear. So where will it all end? Only God knows. But we have had major prophetic developments out of every major war in the Middle East, as I'm sure you know. 48, Israel was born out of that war that started months before. Israel's birth was announced in May. And in 67, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount was captured, and Judea and Samaria, along with Gaza and Golan and the Sinai Peninsula and all of that, some of which has given up. And by the way, the defense minister yesterday told soldiers in the South, he said, I want to remind you guys that when we left here in 2005, it wasn't so long, see you later, it was goodbye. We didn't want to come back in here. We certainly don't. He made that abundantly clear that this is the last thing anyone was thinking about 2.5 weeks ago during Sukkot. Who would have? And again, you couldn't have imagined even the what they would actually do. But so I think it will probably see the fulfillment of prophecy. The one that I think is most likely, there's several, but is Isaiah 17. I've written about that several times, and my novel begins with that prophecy unfolding. And in my novel, it begins in the north, but there's trouble in the south too and stuff, and there's rockets, and the whole thing escalates, and others get involved, and it gets to that point. Well, you can read it later if you haven't read Isaiah 17 in the last 2 hours, but it talks about the complete destruction of Syria. It says Damascus will be wiped out, annihilated, and sovereignty will disappear from Damascus. It won't be the capital of anything, of any state or anything. After that, it'll be so decimated, apparently. But it also says that in the same apparently parent war between Syria and Israel, it never says that outright, but that the fatness of Jacob will become lean. It'll be like the shaking of an olive tree. Many olives will fall, but many will stay on. Some will stay on. So Israel's not destroyed, but it suffers greatly in whenever that prophecy is fulfilled. Now, some say it's been fulfilled in history, like they do all the prophecy, some scholars and whatever. But Damascus has been conquered, they say, 18 times over the years. It's never been leveled. It's never been destroyed. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on earth. And of course, it's a importantly major city to the Muslims, not just the Syrians. It's considered sacred also and very historic. Why? Because Muhammad visited there. And that's in the Hadith. He went up there in a trade convoy and his little wives were there and, that sort of thing. So what would prompt that? What could cause that? First of all, well, obviously a nuclear strike could. What would prompt that? Something similar happening to Israel. Either a nuclear strike first, which, as I said, is not impossible at all. Russia's involved in this too. But more likely chemical weapons. And we know that Syria has an extensive still today because they've been using them in the last few years in their war, killing their own people. Chemical weapons, which, these are not jokes. If sarin nerve gas explodes over central Tel Aviv in the afternoon, anybody that gets just a droplet of it on them is paralyzed, and your system shuts down, your central nervous system or whatever. It's a horrible thing. And they can explode. They could, send these over whole neighborhoods. Who knows? But these are the possibilities that I see. But at some point, that prophecy will be fulfilled. I think it's now. It talks about an uproar from the world afterwards, which there would be. The Islamic world would go totally ballistic. And we'd probably then see a second wave, not maybe immediately, but following that to react, which I think will be Psalm 83, if you're familiar with that. Talks about 10 different Arab groups or names are used there. 6 of them I point out, not in this book, but in another book. 6 of them are located in what is today Jordan. So Jordan would have to lose its pro-American government and monarchy and switch. Well, that's probably going to happen now in this war, probably. And if it does, of course, then we have yet another front along the whole East. So that's another real concern. And King Abdullah is very nervous. I mean, there was estimated 10,000 people outside the Israeli embassy yesterday, throwing things and screaming and demanding the embassy be shut down and all Israelis thrown out of the country, and different things. And of course, over half the Jordanian citizens have Palestinian origin, or they came across the river. So that's going to be something to watch. But I think that would follow. Some are talking about Gog and Magog. I've said over the years, and I wrote about it not in this book, but in another one, that I don't think that's the next thing to take place, as many do. And the main, I won't give a whole talk here about that, but the main reasons, in summary, are that Israel is apparently at peace when this happens, this invasion, because it says I don't mean that it's just calm. They've made peace because it says there'll be no defenses against this invasion. Probably they will have given up their nuclear arsenal as part of the Antichrist's, imposed peace, and these other things will have happened in the meantime. But the main reason is because at the end of it, of course, the invading forces led by Rosh in the north, far north, which is undoubtedly Russia, Persia, Iran with them, Libya, which is got a radical side that Russia's backing right now in the east, and a couple other places. So that's not ready yet, A, but B, in the end, at the end of that war, it says the Israeli people turn fully back to God, give their lives to him. He brings the remaining Jews around the world, not living in Israel, back, it says, Ezekiel 39. And the kingdom is established. Well, if it happens now, Gog and Magog or whatever, then is Israel going to immediately turn after that to, I wish, but the Antichrist is going to rule Israel too, the whole world, for 3.5 years. And many in Israel will follow him, will back him, no doubt about it, And so I'm just saying that that I believe is part of Armageddon, is the opening stage of the final battle of Armageddon, when this invasion comes from the north, and then you have the 200 million come from the east, in response, and all of this is all going on. But the Syrian war, the Isaiah 17 war, sounds bad enough. And if it is the time for that, then we're going to see a lot of death and destruction. And I'm sorry to say that, but and I'll end by saying this: it takes 2 parties to make peace, true peace, something that will last. It only takes 1 to make war, to start a war. And that's what they've done. They've done it very deliberately, very cruelly, very horribly. You can't find the words. It's just so overwhelming. But the Israeli people are united, at least, and they haven't been, as you all know. And this has brought them together, and they are strong. And Israel is not going to be destroyed. It's not going to be wiped out. The scriptures are clear on that. It's going to suffer, and the whole world's going to suffer under the final wars and the Antichrist and that. And whoever of us are here, a lot of my friends are hoping to be raptured at any moment. I'm looking at my age and thinking, I don't have to wait for that. I'm going to be going sooner than that, probably. It's in the hands of God. But I just lost a friend. Close friend's mother just lost his mother yesterday at age 99. Oh, don't do that, Lord. I don't want to get anywhere near 99. Anyway, God bless you all, and keep praying for Israel, and keep lifting up Jerusalem and the leaders and Bibi and all the 5-man war cabinet and all the soldiers and hundreds of believers in the army are there, and the non-believers and the Arabs. And I mean, war is hell. And it's here and it's sad, but there it is. So
Thank you for joining Olive Tree Community Spokane for today's message. Join us for 24/7 Messianic music and teaching just like this on Messianic Joy Radio. Go to live365.com or download the app Live365 and search for Messianic Joy. Shalom from Olive Tree Community Spokane.